Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to do Sabaton History for the Battle of Thermopylae. We did the song for Sparta, that was the name of the song. I forget which album of theirs it was off of, but it was a week or so ago, so if you haven't seen it yet, I'll put the link up at the top somewhere, and you can go watch that. But this is what we're going to get into today. I'm trying to slip it in here. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I'm working on getting out. So I thought if I didn't get the Battle of Thermopylae out soon, it was going to be a while before I could get to it. So it's what we're going to do today. Let's get into it.
Sparta. Oh, what can I say? Hardcore.
It's on The Last Stand. I've talked about this before, but the songs from The Last Stand have a very distinct sound to them, so I'm almost positive that's the album.
The great king of Persia had called, and his empire had answered. In the year 480 BC, an endless stream of marching feet made its way from Asia Minor westward. Not just Persians, but Bactrians and Medes, men from the Caucasus and Arabia, men on horseback, camels, chariots, men from the mountains and the steppe, men from the ancient cities and the sea, Babylonians, Phoenicians, Assyrians, contingents from places as far away as India, Ethiopia, and Egypt.
What's truly bizarre about that is those people probably don't know anything about Greece. Right? Like, these are people that live to the Greeks on the very edge of like the world. Right? And so imagine you get called by Xerxes, your local warriors get together and start marching, and you're going to fight somebody that you don't even know exists until you get there. Like, what a bizarre thing that would be.
All were called to war by Xerxes, king of kings, the son of Darius the Great, their God-appointed ruler and king of the world. And he called them to war against the people of Hellas.
By the way, at some point, we're going to do the story, Darius' story, of how he comes to power. It is really, really insane. The whole thing is. Now, we don't know if it's even close to the truth, but it's what he put out there as how he came into power, and the story is just absolutely insane. All right, sorry, now I'll stop pausing it.
The Hellenic people, I'll call them Greeks for simplicity, had been offered an ultimatum by Darius: bend the knee and offer the King of Kings what is rightfully his earth and his water. Many had done so, but others, most importantly the two mightiest city-states, Athens and Sparta, had refused. Sparta had even thrown the Persian envoys into a well to get their water and their earth from down there. This had provoked the Persians to war, as you may imagine. So begins the story told by the father of historians, Herodotus, a story that would be told for over 2,000 years. The Greeks had won the first round against King Darius at the Battle of Marathon, but Xerxes was determined to even the score. He would not bother to send more envoys, he would send his armies instead. Sitting on a throne made of white marble, Xerxes watched his host move to the Hellespont, where a mighty bridge supported by ships would bring them to Hellas. At the head of the army marched his guard, the Immortals, with wreaths of victory on their heads. To bless this day, he threw a goblet into the sea, alongside a golden bowl and a Persian sword. The gods will be watching Xerxes' great victory. For bridging the Asiatic and European worlds, an army of 3 million men was on the march, at least according to Herodotus. Modern historians narrow that force down to a maximum of 250,000 men, which is still really massive for the time, and it was an enormous feat of logistics to keep them supplied. While many northern Greek cities cooperated with the Persians for fear of being destroyed, Athens and Sparta had made a pact with each other. The powerful triremes of Athens would challenge the Persian fleet, while Sparta would march out to meet the Persians in the field.
Yeah, so a couple of things. The Athenians had found a mine and essentially were trying to decide what they were going to do with the new money, right? They decided they were going to put it into building a navy, so that's what they did. So the Athenian navy is on the sea when this happens, and this is really the start of what will become known as like the historical Athenian navy, right? This is sort of the building blocks of that. Also, there's a story about, I can't remember if it's on the journey there or if it was on one of the, I can't remember what it was, but at some point when they're trying to build a bridge to cross, I believe it was the Hellespont, um, the bridge breaks, and the story is that Xerxes basically has the water punished, right? And so it's literally like lashings, and they take like handcuffs out there. Like it's a really, really bizarre thing. And they're told to like speak down to it, basically. Um, it's really a bizarre story, and we don't really know if it's true. Some historians think it's to make Xerxes look like, well, like a little bit of a joke, but it's really kind of a crazy story.
The Greeks wanted freedom, so they said. Yeah, but the Spartans were not truly free men, but bound to the law of their state. Only a small fraction of Sparta could call themselves Spartiates. Those were the citizens of Sparta, the ones allowed to vote, who reigned over the Periokos, the free neighbors, and the Helots, the servant class. Spartiates were the warrior class, disciplined by a system of rules that set them apart from other men. They were not permitted to own silver or gold, were not allowed to trade or take a profession. Instead, they trained their whole lives to serve the state, a training which only the strong, the cunning, and the tough would survive. Their bodies and minds were toughened by a lifetime of military drills and athletics. By the time of Xerxes' invasion, there were only around 8,000 adult male Spartiates. They were few, but they were professionals. They wore their hair long and a proud scarlet coat, and were capable of carrying out the most complex of military maneuvers with ease. It was already late July, and autumn was not too far off, with the strong storms of the Mediterranean. Xerxes had to move if he wanted to keep up with his supply fleet.
So I had this conversation in the comments. I think of the music video for Sparta. It's hard to determine what sort of like badassness the Spartans had, because it's hard to draw the line on whether it was like their insane form of training and all of that that made them so incredibly dominant, or if it was the fact that they were doing any training at all, and the majority of the people they fought were not, right? If you watch an army that drills, they are going to look like aliens if you put them next to an army that doesn't drill, right? It's night and day on what they're able to do as far as maneuverability. And so it's hard to determine where the line is for, this is what they could do because of their intense, crazy lives and training and all that. And this is what they could do strictly because they trained at all, and most around them did not. Right? So it's kind of a weird thing there. But there really is no doubt that they certainly did have the crazy training and lifestyle and all that, and I'm sure it played a role. I'm sure it did. I don't know how it could not. I just don't know where the line is for how much of a role it played.
Spartans went north to meet the Persians, but could only bring a portion of their forces, since the holy festival of Carnea was around the corner, which forbade the Spartan host to go to war. Only 300 Spartiates, led by their king Leonidas, were sent northwards. Each Spartiate was personally chosen by the king and had to have a living heir, since there was a good chance he was not coming back. Now, they were accompanied by around 1,000 Perioikoi and Helots, and were soon joined by other allied contingents, mostly Thebans and Thespians. So, around 3,000 men assembled at Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Thermopylae got its name from being near sulfuric hot springs. In terms of technical warfare, the Spartans did not fight much differently than their fellow Greeks, but much differently than the Persians. The Greeks favored the shield wall of tightly packed, heavily armored warriors, who were to stand as a single block, relying on weight and solidity of their formation. The armor was extremely heavy, especially compared to the Persians. Corinthian bronze helmets covered their head fully, but for the characteristic T. Their composite leather breastplates and shoulder corselets were reinforced by metal scales and sheets. The large shield was covered with bronze and known as the hoplon, making the warrior a hoplite. On it, the Spartans bore the lambda symbol for Lacedaemon, the Greek name for Sparta. Armed with a 6-foot spear and with a sword for close-quarter combat, they were the most formidable of opponents.
Joined by the brothers of you against the faithful horde, Hellenic hearts are set aflame, the hot gate calls their name.
While the Spartan right flank was guarded by the sea, the left was blocked by the steep slopes of Mount Kallidromos. There was even an ancient wall guarding the pass. It was the perfect place for hoplite warfare. Coming south from Macedonia, the first Persian scout who approached the Hot Gates told Xerxes of a group of half-naked men readying themselves for battle. And
Yeah, so they have a former Spartan king with them, the Persians do, who essentially explains to Xerxes what this craziness is. I'll go back and let Indy talk about it in a second. Um, but the hot gates are perfect, right? You basically even the numerical advantage because you funnel this huge army into a small fighting area, so you don't get outflanked if you're the Greeks, right? And I say Greeks very loosely here. There is no Greek identity at this time. That is something that was put on later. It absolutely did not exist in this world, right? So when we talk about today, like a quote unquote free Greece that's being fought for in this time period, that's just not the reality of it. I believe there were less Greek city states fighting against the Persians than for the Persians. I'm almost positive there were more Greek city states fighting for the Persians in this conflict than against them. So it is not this simple Persia versus Greece that it's been made out to be later on. But the tactics are brilliant. Like I said in the music for it, you have a style of warfare that's quick, mobile, heavy on archery on the Persian side, and it has done very, very well for them in the type of warfare that they have conventionally fought. When they get to Greece and you have the hoplites, the heavy armored infantry, it's a totally different thing. And the archery becomes way less effective, and then you have to send in essentially light infantry to fight against heavy infantry, and that's just not a good matchup, right? The heavy infantry is just overall equipped to handle that fight better than the light infantry is. So it really is, the weapon systems have a lot to do with the dominance of the Greeks in this time period. And I talked about it before, but historians argue all the time about whether that's only the weapon systems or whether there's some culture or mindset or whatever else that could potentially go into why the Greeks were so dominant against the Persians. But the thing that we know for sure that we can actually measure are the weapon systems, and they absolutely do play a big role.
And seemingly unbothered by the large host assembling in front of them, Xerxes wanted them swept aside and ordered a frontal attack. Because of a lack of tactical choices, and, well, a lack of patience, okay? On the 18th of August, 480 BC, the battle began. The Persian host, though, they were used to battles in vast open areas or in mountains, where speed and agility brought the advantage. Much of the Persian force was only lightly armed with short spears, daggers, they had wicker shields. Their main weapon was the bow, not the sword. Some elite units wore leather armor or reinforced jerkins, but most wore no armor at all. At first, the Medes attacked and promptly ran into a wall of gleaming bronze. It was a terrible slaughter, as their weapons could not penetrate the shield wall. The Medes withdrew without making much of a dent in the Greek formation. Next were the men of Susa, proud warriors who fired a hail of arrows into the hoplites before they charged over the dead bodies of the Medes. The men of Susa fared no better and broke like a wave against a rock. By the afternoon, there was a second wall. This time it was made out of corpses. Xerxes was losing what little patience he had in the first place, but clearly this was no ordinary force he faced. He ordered the immortals forward. The Spartans performed a feigned retreat, stopping and bracing only at the last moment when the enemy charged them. Then, after the slaughter, they again pushed and advanced a short pace to tear into the enemy. Spartans were made for this kind of battle. Xerxes, watching from his throne, is said to have sprung 3 times into the air out of rage that even his beloved immortals could not break the Greek lines. With heavy losses, the attacks were called off for the night. By now, the Greek defense and defiance had caused a traffic jam. The whole host was halted by a few thousand men in the narrow pass. The Spartans and their allies tended their wounds. They too had casualties, but not much compared with the mass of corpses in front of them. The next morning, Xerxes put more troops into the pass, promising rich rewards for success. It was another day of hard fighting, and the Greek line held fast. No hail of arrows, no frontal assault could break the defiant defenders. It was close to nightfall that the Persians learned of the secret pass over Mount Kalidromos that would lead to the Spartan rear. Now, this was, of course, not a secret pass at all. It was just a secret to the Persians, who, like all invading forces throughout all of history, did not have local knowledge.
Yeah.
In Herodotus' history, this betrayal would be attributed to a certain Ephialtes, probably a local who simply told them about it for money. Leonidas had positioned a small defense on the pass with men from Lamia. He certainly would have preferred to have his trusted Spartans in that position, but he could not afford to remove any of them from the main battle. And though the men of Lamia had just one job, to keep an eye out and warn the Spartan king in time if the Persians were coming, they messed it up. They got totally surprised during the night. News that the immortals were upon them reached Leonidas too late. Their rear was in danger, and even if they fled, the Persian horsemen would pursue them. But since the word flight did not exist in the Spartan lexicon anyways, Leonidas offered his allies a withdrawal option, while his Spartans would hold the Persians off as long as possible.
Yeah, so the Spartans here are going to form a rear guard, and they're going to allow the retreat of everybody else that came to fight at Thermopylae, right? There are other Greeks that stay. It's not like everybody except the Spartans leave. However, that is the option that's given, right? Like, the Spartans basically, there's no other way. But for everybody else, Leonidas basically gives them the opportunity to flee and live to fight another day. They're going to be the rear guard so that they can keep the cavalry from chasing down everybody else that's fleeing, right? So that's the whole idea here.
Send a message to Sparta to tell them how they died. Still, many men chose to stay with the Spartan king, so their numbers were still around 1,200 men strong. Leonidas told the remaining men to have a good breakfast, because tonight they would dine in Hades. With their lives now forfeit, They would go out to inflict as many casualties upon the enemy as possible. As the immortals appeared behind them, Leonidas' force formed a hedgehog of spears, and the Persians had to be whipped into battle out of fear of the Spartans. The final hours of the Spartans and their allies were hours of relentless battle. They killed and killed, driving the enemy against the mountain walls and down into the sea. They fought until their spears broke, their shields and their helmets were dented, and their swords went blunt. At one point, Leonidas was killed, and a savage battle over his body ensued. The Persians trying to claim his body as a trophy, and the Spartans desperately fighting for the honor of their king. It is said that 2 of Xerxes' brothers died in the attempt before the Persians retrieved the body. The Spartans defended themselves to the last, until overwhelmed by spears and arrows. They died to a man. There were no Spartan prisoners. By midday of the 3rd day, it was all over. Xerxes himself went down to inspect the battlefield. He cut off the head of Leonidas and impaled it on a spear for his army to see. The Spartans were mortal. The Spartans could be killed. But their last stand had given the Persians a taste of what was to come. Greece was not a pushover. The war was far from over and would eventually be decided at sea and on the battlefield of Plataea in Greek favor. But the last stand at Thermopylae, at the hot gates, was a symbol to the rest of Hellas, a rallying call, and a legend to stand through the centuries. As for the Spartans and their bravery and their might, after the war, there would be a plaque at Thermopylae bearing the words, "Tell them in Lacedaemon, passerby, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Okay, so all joking aside, Sparta, I mean, it's a popular topic. Why? How did this develop?
Okay, so it's actually Joachim sitting in our studio and working, and I'm sitting in my office working in the same building. And he's working on a new song together with the guy Ken, who has been helping us out with writing a couple of songs over the years. They have some little idea. They ask me for my input, and I come over and I'm like, guys, I'm not hearing a metal song. I'm hearing the soundtrack to the movie 300. I hear the ooh, ah. In the song, I hear this, and I see it in front of me. And they were like, you're right. The song became very popular.
Right.
And it's a song I really love to perform live. And when we were performing it on the tour, we, of course, needed to bring a little bit of theater to the stage. So we brought Spartans, and we put Joachim in a helmet.
Like that?
Similar to this.
Wow,
That
yeah.
he was wearing it, and he was wearing the costume, maybe not the only the
Oh, yeah, well, you know.
but he was wearing the helmet, and he was trying to sing the song, and he was always complaining because inside of this one you will hear very, very strange noises, and it will distort your voice, and you can't really take the tones perfect or
So
hit
it
the
did,
notes.
it did semi mess up the actual. You know?
Yeah, so Joachim was not really happy about singing inside our helmet, and since then we have not sing from a helmet.
But what about the actors playing Spartans and stuff?
They
That
were
must have been interesting.
Yeah, we had a couple of our crew members who really enjoyed it.
Yeah?
And obviously they needed because they barely wear any clothes under that.
Oh, yeah, of
So
course.
they needed to be a little bit fit. So we needed to carefully select the toughest crew members who could wear the spears and the shields.
Look at that. Oh, look at those bodies, huh?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
brutal guys.
No, I wouldn't have been picked. I mean, I look good, but you know. I think I'm older than any of the Spartans lived to be. Yeah, I'm 52 now. Those guys were long dead.
Yeah, they were long dead.
Well, it was a tougher life back then. It was a brutal life. So how should we end? Should we say it?
We can do it.
Okay.
This is Sparta!
Okay, so that was the Battle of Thermopylae, Sabaton History, Sparta. I love this topic. I said it before, but I'm gonna try to find some more classical, archaic, ancient Greece videos that I can do. Even though the sources are kind of spotty depending on the time period. A lot of it comes from Herodotus, obviously. If you go to archaic Greece, the Herodotus isn't even there. So I'll see what I can find, but I'm going to see if I can find something for it because I love this topic. I love this time period. It's one of my favorites. So another great video. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I'll put the link to the Discord down below, and I'll see you all next time.